What is Old Dalecarlian? Old Dalecarlian, Swedish forndalska, is the reconstructed Old Norse dialect that the Upper Dalecarlian dialects, such as Elfdalian, Vommusmål, and Orsamål, developed from. It's unknown where Old Dalecarlian developed, but it's unlikely that it was already spoken from the start in Upper Dalarna, since many of the innovations are old and require a distinct development already in the proto-norse and later early medieval periods, due to diachronic considerations. It has been suggested that Dalecarlian was once spoken over a wider area further south. This map shows the position of Dalarna in Sweden and the Upper Dalarna region where these dialects traditionally were spoken. Old Dalecarlian has a few distinct early developments, along with a blend of eastern and western traits common in Norrland, northern Sweden. I will mainly use Lars Levander's Old Dalecarlian forms, but with an emphasis on the Ovansiljan or Upper Dalarna dialects. Like most dialects in northern Scandinavia, Dalecarlian has a combination of eastern and western traits. Some eastern traits include limited a umlaut, the lowering of Germanic o to o, like in stolit, burit, luva, hul, gulv, compared to western stolit, borit, lova, hol, golv. There is also a lot of breaking in Dalecarlian, sometimes even more than your typical Old Swedish, giava, stjala, bjara, jata, siax, compared to western geva, stella, bera, eta, sex. Dalecarlian, much like Old Swedish, also inserts a b or a d before a r or l sound. Gamblir, kumbir, compared to western gamlir, kumer, without this inserted consonant. Old Dalecarlian is also reconstructed with the ending in second person plural of verbs. This final nasal was later lost in a regular sound change. However, many Dalecarlian dialects have an ending ith or ir. However, this is not the same ending as the Old West Norse ending ith, and it's usually explained as a later development from a clitic pronoun. There are also a number of western traits in Dalecarlian. Among them is r umlaut, threar, ber, kyr, compared to Old Swedish threar, bar, ko, where the vowel historically was fronted by the originally z sound that later turned into an r. This is a very typical West Norse trait that's barely seen in, for example, Swedish. Also notice that the first word here, threar, has the shift from ea to ja, another typical Western trait. While it may look like the typically Swedish and Danish shift from ja to je, this only happens to short vowels in Dalecarlian and not long vowels. One very typical Western Scandinavian trait is nasal assimilation before voiceless stops. This is also seen in Dalecarlian. Sikka, witir, sopir, compared to Old Swedish sionka, winter, swamper, without this assimilation. As I said earlier, Dalecarlian also has the stress shift of ea to ja. Sion, lja, compared to Old Swedish sea, le, without this shift. Dalecarlian also has the typically Western umlaut in the subjunctive of verbs. Wäri, compared to Old Swedish wari, without this umlaut. However, there is no trace of umlaut in the present tense of strong verbs in Dalecarlian, which is common in, for example, Norwegian dialects. Based on later developments, Old Dalecarlian must have preserved the diphthongs ei and öj that turn into e and ö in Denmark and southern Sweden. But this can't really be seen as a distinctly Dalecarlian trait, since it's very common in northern Sweden and Finland, for example, to keep these diphthongs. It's not really a distinctly Western trait. There are also a number of traits that can only be described as Old Dalecarlian. Among them are preserved nasal vowels, or, sion, gas, thater, where the nasal vowel is only really discernible through reconstruction or a few words seen in, for example, the first grammarian. Dalecarlian dialects are the only North Germanic varieties to keep these nasal vowels into the modern period, since they seem to have merged in the early medieval period elsewhere. Some nasal vowels in Dalecarlian even predate Old Norse, going back to Proto-Germanic. Another nasal-related sound change in Dalecarlian is the rounding of short a whenever an n was assimilated next to it, to a voiceless stop. For example, ank turn into ok and ant turn into ot. So bocki, sock, drock, thock, stott, brott corresponds to Old Swedish backi, sank, drack, thack, stant, brant, with and without nasal assimilation. This rounding is completely unique to Dalecarlian. It's not found elsewhere in Scandinavia. Dalecarlian also seems to show a distinct vowel phoneme, where there is an alternation between o and o in Western and Eastern Scandinavian in a few words. Dalecarlian has a distinct vowel that develops separately from both o and o. This vowel here is labeled as u2, along with its umlaut counterpart y2. Some examples are booth, bo, bro, kyr, byr. This umlauted y from the second u2 vowel merges with the umlaut outcome of Germanic eu with I umlaut, like in lyda and nyr. The reasons why these vowels are separate is because the other long vowels in Dalecarlian, like in, for example, moose, turn into diphthongs in later dialects. So Dalecarlian has, for example, mouse for mouse, but booth. This implies that there was a separate vowel phoneme in this dialect. There is also another distinction between a few Germanic sound sequences. For example, reter, liter, thiter preserve their distinct vowels, similar to German, whereas Old Swedish has ret, let, thet with the same vowel throughout. This is also unique in Scandinavian. Dalecarlian dialects are also well known for being h-dropping, turning hest into est, but this sound change is very difficult to date, since there are some signs that seem to point that h was preserved in the 1600s in Dalarna. Dalecarlian also has the shift of au to o in, for example, lopa, röðir, klöv, öga, but this is not unique to Dalarna, and similar changes are common in Norrland. The Germanic diphthong eo turns into jo in all positions in Dalecarlian, unlike, for example, Old West Norse, where it turns into jo, jo or y depending on position and surrounding consonants, whereas Eastern Scandinavian simply raises eo to eo, bjóða, dior, ljoga, diopir, sjókir. It's also noticeable here that Dalecarlian does not have r umlaut in the word dior, which is dyr in, for example, Norwegian. Old Dalecarlian completely lacks w breaking or umlaut. For example, sikka, singa, compared to Old Swedish sjunga, Old Icelandic syngja, beg, ling, compared to Old Swedish bjog, Old Icelandic bygg. The preservation of these root vowels is almost unique in Scandinavia. There are also a number of grammatical traits in Dalecarlian. For example, the ending un is added to feminine nominative and neuter plural for some pronoun forms. The ending ur is used in feminine end-stem genitive, where other North Germanic languages would have a simple u. The word ir, iru in plural, lacks the lowering that is seen in other North Germanic varieties, Old Swedish eru. Class 7 verbs, such as falla, have the past tense ia or ia with an unrounded diphthong. This is distinct from both Old Swedish fjoll and Old Icelandic fell. Dalecarlian also adds I as the prop vowel or svarabakti vowel before syllabic R in endings. Dalecarlian also has vowel balance, but this is not unique to Dalarna and common in northern Scandinavia. While many of the developments in Dalecarlian might seem unique, some of them have straight parallels in Old Gutnish, making Old Gutnish and Dalecarlian surprisingly similar. For example, the tendency to keep vowel distinctions before a lost velar fricative has parallels in Old Gutnish, where, for example, Old auch doesn't become monophthongized. Old Gutnish haur, thau, compared to Old Icelandic har, tho. While Old Gutnish and Old Dalecarlian don't have exactly the same outcomes here, they are quite distinct in having different vowel outcomes compared to other Scandinavian languages. The distinct treatment of Germanic eo in Dalecarlian also has a parallel in Old Gutnish, where eo turns into yao in all positions. Bjauda diaur, liauga, diauper, siauker. This parallels Old Dalecarlian in the way that Gutnish and Dalecarlian have their own outcomes of this diphthong, whereas West Norse has a very complicated development depending on position, and Eastern Scandinavian simply turns it into iu. Dalecarlian and Gutnish are also the only Scandinavian varieties to keep the original vowel in the cognates to English sink and sing, where Gutnish has sinka, singa, whereas Old Swedish, for example, has siunga, Old Icelandic has syngja, showing that this very odd trait is only found in Gutnish and Dalecarlian. Some of the quirks of Dalecarlian grammar also have straight parallels in Old Gutnish. For example, the ending un in feminine nominative and neuter plural is found in Old Gutnish in, for example, thissun, engun. And this is used in words corresponding to English these, my, our, and so on. The use of ur as a feminine end-stem genitive also has a straight parallel in Old Gutnish, with kunur, kirkur, attested in Old Gutnish. Preserving ir and iru without lowering is also found in Gutnish, and a similar vowel in class 7 verbs like riad. Another form that's nearly unique to both Gutnish and Dalecarlian is the short form of skall, skulu, cognate to English shall, as al, ulu, without the first consonants. While Old Dalecarlian is not attested, many forms such as pronouns can be fairly well reconstructed. Most of the pronouns in Old Dalecarlian match up with typical West Norse forms, but there are some exceptions. Many dialects seem to point to a first-person pronoun with a high vowel, ik, and much like Icelandic and Western Norwegian, some dialects use the old dual pronouns repurposed as plural pronouns. The pronouns for he, she, and it shows a number of peculiarities. For example, the dative singular neuter has a much lower vowel than other North Germanic varieties, where Old West Norse has thwi, Old Swedish has thy, Old Dalecarlian has thö. The root vowel in the feminine demonstrative and pronoun also seems to go back to an old a with nasalization. This is also quite rare in Scandinavia and seems to parallel Gutnish, lacking u umlaut in this form. The word for that undergoes a shift to turning thet into het, but this is also very common in northern Scandinavia. The word for our would have been inflected like this in Old Dalecarlian, with the nasal vowel or and the distinctly feminine and neuter forms orun. This root vowel, or, has clear parallels in early West Norse and Old Gutnish also, but corresponds to war in most other Scandinavian languages. The forms war, or, and os interacted in complicated ways in early Scandinavian. Many distinctly Dalecarlian traits are seen in the verb cognate to English sink, with sikka in the infinitive, sikkir, sok in the present and past singular. The weak verb meaning to do, corresponding to Swedish göra, has a form that's quite similar to Old Gutnish also. Gjara, but gardi in the past tense, and gart in the neuter participle. Much of this information was provided by the users of Nordiska dialekter on Discord.